Hey everybody, and welcome back to Cityscape Brewing. Today we're going to be brewing up a cold IPA. And I know what you're thinking, the world needs more versions of IPAs. I mean, we got the West Coast IPA, we got the Hazy IPA, we've got the Black IPA, we've got the Double IPA, we've got the IPL, not to be confused with now the Cold IPA, which we're going to be brewing up today. And since it's one of my favorite beer styles, well, I say the more the merrier. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes the Cold IPA different than all these other styles right after you hit that like and subscribe button, grab yourself a beer, and we're going to get after it. So what is a cold IPA? And don't be confused with IPL because you're thinking cold, you're thinking lager, right? IPLs, or India Pale Lagers, are exactly the same as a West Coast IPA, but you brew it with lager yeast. And so it's the same recipe, the same color, the same style notes. All of that is identical, you're just brewing it with lager yeast. The Cold IPA is a newer type of IPA that was created by Wayfinder Brewing in Portland, Oregon. And their thought is to make a West Coastier version of a West Coast IPA. So according to their own website, they wanted something that was drier with excessive hoppiness, but with a cleaner finish. And they really wanted to try a beer style that would showcase those hops in a new way, by not having some of those other characteristics of the beer, such as the malt bill, get in the way to let those hops really shine. So to do this, we're going to have a very reduced malt bill that's going to be a very clean, crisp, light malt bill, which we'll talk about in a minute, but be really heavy on the hop additions, both during the boil, during the whirlpool, and a huge amount of dry hops. So you can kind of think of this like the opposite of a hazy IPA. When you think of a hazy IPA, you think of a thicker mouthfeel with low bitterness, that hazy appearance, and almost like juice-like appearance. Well, with a cold IPA, it's going to have a light, clean, crisp, but yet bitter appearance. Almost like a Pilsner or a Kolsch type of clear, light color and crispness, but also an IPA, so letting those hops really shine through. Wayfinder Brewing shared this recipe with the Craft Beer and Branding website, which shared it as a kind of cartoon version that you needed a little bit of deciphering and decoding to figure out a 5-gallon batch. But I've done all that hard lifting for you. That's going to be in the recipe, as always, shared in the video description below. Alright guys, I have to interrupt and tell you about something really awesome. After I got done filming this video and brewing this beer up, I contacted a fellow brew tuber named Steven from Northwest Small Batch Brewing and asked him, can you guys get your hand on, Wayfinder's original cold IPA where you're at? Well, not only did he do that, he was able to porch bomb me with a whole bunch of awesome beers, including 3 of Wayfinder's original cold IPA. So I need everybody to do me a huge favor and go down in the video description and hit that link to Northwest Small Batch Brewing and go show him some love and hit that subscribe button on his channel. Thanks, Steven. I appreciate it, man, and I can't wait to do this side by side and see how it tastes. So let's jump right into the recipe. In this case, we're going to be using about 9.75 pounds of Pilsner, 2.5 pounds of Flaked Rice, and I'm going to be adding about a ½ pound of Dextrose, which is corn sugar. And so the reason we're adding that is because we need to be able to get that ABV up to about 7% without adding a lot of color or other grains in order to make this a drier beer. And that's what you're looking for. You want a very clean, crisp beer, and in order to make it that crisp mouthfeel and finish, you need it to be a little bit more dry, which means we're shooting for a final gravity that's under 1010 or 1.010. Our final gravity is expected to be somewhere around 1.008, maybe even lower. Also, to help with that bitterness, we're going to be mashing in at about 148, so 148 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a little bit less than you would for like a balanced beer at about 152, and that mash temperature really matters. And this is where, when you slide up and down in temperature range, you're going to be either getting a cleaner, crisper beer the cooler your mash temperature is, or you're going to be having that kind of thicker, fuller mouthfeel up at the sometimes 158 degrees for like a porter or a stout. This beer has tons of hops in it. First, it's gonna start out with a 60-minute edition of Magnum. We're gonna be throwing in some Mosaic and Centennial just towards the end of the boil. We're gonna be throwing more Centennial and Mosaic at it in a Whirlpool, and then we're gonna have a huge amount of dry hops with Chinook, Cascade, and Amarillo going in at about 75% attenuation, meaning we're gonna be throwing those dry hops in, not quite at high Krausen, but not quite finished either. By dry hopping in the middle of fermentation like that, similar to a hazy, it's gonna do some biotransformation of some of those oils that are found in the hops and give it that citrusy, awesome flavor that we're looking for at the final product. And last but not least, we're gonna be finishing this thing off with a lager yeast. Yes, I said a lager yeast. This is not an India Pale Lager, but we are gonna be using Fermentis W3470. We're gonna be sprinkling a packet of that, but we're not going to be fermenting it at cold temperatures like we would a lager. Instead, we're gonna ramp this thing up to 65 degrees, which is pretty high for a lager yeast to ferment at. But that's gonna prevent some of those sulfur esters and other things that you might get in a lager and make it more of a cleaner ale. But it's also gonna ferment out pretty fast, and it's going to make it a little dry. Also, to help out the bitterness and the hop bite in this beer, we're gonna be having a higher ratio of sulfur and chloride, which means we're gonna be adding a little bit more gypsum and a little less calcium chloride in this one in order to give it that kind of crisp, clean bitterness bite that we're looking for at the end of the beer. And so that's all gonna be based on your own water profile. I have a video in the description below that goes through how you can find your own water report and adjust your waters accordingly. In addition to the water additions, we're going to be adding some ascorbic acid, which you've heard me talk about in previous videos, which will help you preserve that beer over time. It's going to help prevent oxidation, especially in these lighter colored beers. That will keep that pH low even after we add those dry hops. So for our final beer, it'll maintain that nice, bitter, crisp appearance and flavor. So without further ado, let's whip this batch up. Let's brew it today. We're gonna go through the whole brewing process really quick. We're gonna go through fermentation, and at the end, I'm gonna show you how this turned out, and we'll taste it side by side together. You can also now become a channel member, which means you can hit that join button below, and by doing that, you're gonna get access to all my videos earlier than everyone else. As soon as I put them on YouTube and they're scheduled to go out to everybody, you get to watch them ahead of time. And so you'll be able to see a sneak peek before everybody else. Hit that join button, I appreciate it. All right, during the brew day, we went ahead and mashed in our Pilsner Flaked Rice, and I added some rice hulls just to make sure we wouldn't get a stuck sparge at 148 degrees for 60 minutes. I then went through my normal recirculation and Vorloffing process and got to a full boil. I added my DIY hop spider just before the boil and some firm cap S to make sure that we didn't boil over. Then, once we got a nice rolling boil, I added 0.75 ounces of Magnum for a 60-minute bittering addition. Then we let that boil all the way down to about 7 minutes left in the boil, and we added an ounce of Mosaic and Centennial. At the same time, I added my Whirlpool tablet and some yeast nutrient, and the yeast nutrient will ensure that we have a healthy fermentation. After the boil was done, we cooled that down to about 180 degrees. I added 1 ounce of Mosaic and Centennial again for the Whirlpool. I let that sit in there for about 10 minutes, and then I finished cooling down to pitching temperatures. We transferred that from our kettle to our fermenter. Then I added 2 dry hop sacks with the Chinook, Cascade, and Amarillo dry hops. Even though these will be pulled at the same time, I went ahead and put them in 2 bags just so it would keep out of the Krausen during fermentation. I went ahead and pitched our Fermentis W3470, and we fermented at 65 degrees in my fermentation chamber. After the beer got to about 75% attenuation, I went ahead and pulled those magnets off and let those hops drop into the beer and work their magic. Once we hit terminal gravity, I went ahead and cold crashed this down and let that sit for a couple days before we kegged our beer. All right, the time has come to try these beers side by side. So I have, as I discussed before, the original, the OG Cold IPA from Wayfinder Brewing. Thanks again to Steven from Northwest Small Batch Brewing. Go again, hit that like and subscribe button on his channel, link in the video description. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna pour up one of mine, pour up one of theirs, and we're gonna see how they turn out. All right, guys, in full disclosure, I did try these beers side by side. I actually brought a couple of those cans over to a buddy of mine's house, and we tried them amongst about 6 or 7 homebrewers, and I wanted to have their thoughts on my beer side by side. So I'll let you guys know about their thoughts in just a moment after we go through the comparison between the two. First, let me start out by saying, just because this is the original OG cold IPA, that makes it pretty awesome. But is it the best? I don't know. There's probably a lot of different cold IPAs now, and some I prefer more than others. But it's kind of cool that this is the original. And there's a little surprise nugget on the bottom of the can. It says, "Y'all know me, still the same OG," which I think is pretty awesome. So we're gonna try these things side by side. I'm gonna go first with the original and then with mine, and we're gonna talk about the differences. And there are some differences because we didn't have the exact recipe. In the recipe provided, they told us what they used for the grain bill, but they did not give the amounts. They also used some step mash process that I didn't do, and they used some hop oils. Instead, I just used regular hops. So we have a lot of the same similarities, but there are some differences. First, the original OG. It's super clear. And it's kind of fogging up on the glass here, but it's really clear, just like you would expect a lager or some type of Pilsner to be. So I think it's gonna be super crushable. Flavor-wise, you get that citrusy goodness, you get that clean, crisp taste that's kind of wanting you to come back for more when you try it. You get those fruity characters, a little bit of bitterness, which is great. It's very different than what you would have for this clear of beer. Now on to mine. The first thing you can tell is the color is a little different, right? So I have a lighter complexion in mine. The SRM is a little bit lower. They may have used a pale malt or something that had a little bit more color, or maybe they used less flaked rice in here. But the clarity, other than the fact that my glass is fogging up a little bit, is about the same between the two of them. So let's go in for the aroma. Surprisingly, mine has more aromatics than the original does. And I'm not sure if it's just because this has been canned for a couple of months, or if mine's just fresher, or maybe it's just because of the hops that I used versus hop oils that they used in theirs. I'm not really sure, but let's go in for the flavor. The one thing you'll notice about mine version is it has a little bit more of a bite to it, which is great. I actually like that. It's still clean and crisp, but the main difference is the amount of hoppy flavors that I get in mine versus the original. Mine has that hop character, citrus aroma flavor that really balances out and goes really well with how clear and crisp this beer is. I really like how that plays off. In this beer, in the original, I get a little bit of those, it's almost like a thiol flavor. Maybe it's from the hop extract that they use, but I'm really not sure. There is a difference though in that citrusy flavor. It's kind of a twang in this one, which isn't bad. And if you didn't have them side by side, I'd crush this beer all day long. But it is a little bit different, and maybe it has to do with those hop oils. I'm not really sure. So, what did everybody else think? Well, I really wish I would have filmed their reactions because we tried a couple of samples each. I did blind taste tests between several of the people that homebrew. They tried them side by side, not knowing which one was which. And every single person chose my beer over the original as far as flavor and what they preferred side by side. I think everybody agreed that this beer, the original, is a great tasting cold IPA, and the original, which is cool, right? Coming from Portland, Oregon, all the way across the country in the Carolinas, we get to try this side by side. Some of those preferences could have been the fact that this was canned. Maybe it's better fresh at the brewery. I don't know, I'm not there. If I'm ever in Portland, Oregon, you know darn well I'm going to this brewery to try it out. All in all, to finish things out, this thing is a clean, crisp, crushable beer for the summer months. I'm talking, you will not know this is 7%, and when you get done drinking one of these things, you're gonna fill up another glass immediately. Crushable, citrusy, bitter like you'd want it to be for an IPA, but man, does it go down smooth. As always, I put all of my recipes underneath in the video description. So hit that like and subscribe button and show your appreciation for the channel. You can also buy me a beer by hitting the link in the video description as well. It helps support the channel, and I appreciate each and every one of you guys. Again, go hit that like and subscribe button also on Northwest Small Batch Brewing. Happy brewing and cheers. Hey, Thanks for watching my video. I really do appreciate it. A way you can support the channel is just by buying me a beer. There's a button right there on the screen, and there's a link in the video description below. You can also check out the merchandise in our store, and you can hit the video on the screen right now. You know you want to.